right, good afternoon. K-12 Budget Committee, we're going to have a busy afternoon. We're going to be working, if it is the will of the committee, 7 bills. If we, for some reason, are not able to progress at a good rate, then we also do have the option of coming back tomorrow. I have it on call of the chair. We would announce it at the end of this meeting. It would either be noon or 1:30. There are no other 1:30 meetings scheduled. So hopefully we'll be on track today and that won't be an issue. We will complete working our bills on Monday. There is another bill that we're going to want to work on Monday. So we'll just see how we progress. I want to also welcome Cindy Howerton. She is taking the place of Steve Hubert today. So welcome to our committee. And I believe that Representative Nguyen is online. And yep, and we have everybody else here today. So with that, committee, we're going to go ahead and proceed. I'll open by saying, what is the will of the committee for House Bill 2511? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like the motion to pass out favorably House Bill 2511. This is the Acacia bill, open participation. I have no amendments because I've had some really good conversations with the state and the Ed Board about my concerns on the classifications. I feel really good that they are working on that, so I'm not going to have any amendments. So I would put that out in the form of a motion.
All right, we have House Bill 2511, and we have a second by Representative Hoffman. Now we'll open up for further discussion. Representative Penn.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment. I move that we add into House Bill 2511, House Bill 2514.
And Representative Penn, do you want to share what House Bill 2514 is?
House Bill 2514, thank you so very much. It is the act concerning education authorization of the schools to provide the part-time enrollment options for the students. We'd like to move that into the 2511, Madam.
All right, so we have an amendment on the floor. Do we have a second? Representative Landwehr for the second. And now discussion on the amendment for 2514. I can also pause and ask if anybody needs a review from our reviser on either 2514, which is currently an amendment, or the base bill, which is 2511. No such review? All right. Yes, Representative Tarwater.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Is it intent to keep the language of 2511 and 2514? Both?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on 2514, part-time enrollment? It's codifying what currently happens in many of our school districts, and we do have the formula for it. All right, you may close on your amendment, Representative.
Madam Chair, I close.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment of House Bill 2514, part-time enrollment, being added in 2511, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, motion carries. Back on the base bill, House Bill 2511. Any discussion on House Bill 2511 or an amendment? No amendment. You may close, Representative Johnson, on how the amended version of House Bill 2511.
I close.
All right, that easy enough. House Bill 2511 that has been amended in with House Bill 2514 is ready for your vote. Committee, all those in favor say aye. Aye. And opposed? No. Motion carries. All right, so committee, we have just completed our first set of bundled bills. We'll move on to our next one. Committee, what is your will for House Bill 2615? Representative Thomas.
Madam Chair, I move the committee pass out House Bill 2615 favorably.
All right, there's a motion. Representative Penn for a second. And discussion.
Madam Chair, I do have one amendment.
Yes. Is it conceptual or do you have a balloon?
No, I have the balloon.
Okay, and Nick will provide that.
I have one, thank you. I stole it.
Would you like to explain your amendment or would you like to have Nick?
If Nick is free, I would like him to sort of go through it. He knows the legal jargon, and I might ramble.
All right, sounds great. Nick, if you would explain the proposed amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So committee, we'll just kind of take it as we go along. This strikes certain language that was requested to be stricken. So you see the requirement for these alternative educational opportunities and the requirements for sponsoring entities. This would strike the requirement that the school district's policy have accountability measures within those alternative educational opportunities and sponsoring entities within the school district policies. Certainly the school district would be able to establish policies relating to that type of measure if they chose to. It would also strike the requirement that the alternative educational opportunity that's provided by a sponsoring entity improve the academic success of students. It would also provide that kind of two options. This is one of the keys here with this amendment, kind of two options for approval for these alternative educational opportunities. These things could either be approved by the State Board of Education as an alternative educational opportunity, and we'll see that here soon, or pursuant to the school district policies. So if you turn to the back, this is the State Board of Education approval. A sponsoring entity can petition the state board to approve of an alternative educational opportunity that's provided by that sponsoring entity. If this is kind of applicable on a statewide or regional basis across multiple school districts, the State Board of Education would have 90 days to consider the proposal and would state the reasons if the state board denied the proposal. But if the state board approves the proposal, any school district would be authorized to implement that alternative educational opportunity, and then the state board would continue to have oversight over its approval and of that program.
We have an amendment on the floor. Did we get a second? You were the second for this one? Okay, apologies. And would you like to explain this, or are there questions for the maker of the amendment?
No, Nick did a good job. This was an agreeable language. It sort of streamlines the process a little bit, so not every single district has to sit there and every single district submits a large company to the state board, and the state board approves it. It basically streamlines the process, keeps it more local control with the local boards, and then the state board doesn't have to approve the same company multiple times.
Okay, but with this amendment, they do not have to, it would be a local decision first and foremost, but if a larger entity wanted to just make it available to everyone, they could go to the state board. What happens, Representative, if the state board would deny this? Does that mean then it cannot be approved at a local level? Probably not a risk, but just wanting to make sure. Nick?
So that state board approval is generally applicable as kind of a statewide approval, and if it got denied, local districts could still approve of one of these through their own policy.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Other questions on the amendment? You may close on your amendment.
I don't have a long illustrious speech. I'll just say I close.
All right, all those in favor of the Thomas Amendment for 2615, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Right. We are back on the base bill. The base bill is 2615. Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. This program is, I think, really good program. Is it, being that this says school districts, is it not available to parochial schools?
I would think that parochial schools would have the opportunity to use that too if they're credited by the state board. Nick, what are your thoughts?
I think that they would have options to do that if their governing body or their governing entity allowed for that option. As you heard, I think Brad came and talked about some school districts who were already kind of doing some of these options as well. So I think parochial private schools would have those options.
Thanks for clearing that up. I just want to make sure.
Okay. Any other items for 2615? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to, I'd like to move House Bill 2550 into House Bill 2615.
All right. There is an amendment to move House Bill 2550, the educational savings accounts, into House Bill 2615. Is there a second? Second by Representative Johnson. Now discussion on the amendment. This is the amendment, which is House Bill 2550. No discussion. You may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed, nay.
No.
Okay, motion carries. Okay.
And so back on the bill, Madam Chair.
All right, we are back on the base bill 2615 that now has the contents of 2550. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an amendment for 2550 that we just moved in. And Nick, if you could pass that out. Real quickly, I'll have Nick explain, but real quickly, what this amendment does is it takes out all the references to non-accredited public or private schools so that this would only be for accredited schools that are accredited by the State Board of Education or any national or regional accredited organization, so.
Once we have a chance to look at the balloon amendment. And Representative Hoffman, did you want to, you may have just done that when I was not.
Yeah, if Nick could.
Explain that?
That'd be
Okay.
great.
So committee, this is under the Education Savings Accounts Bill. And under this bill, a student would have to either attend part-time at a public school or and also at a qualified private school, or full-time at a qualified private school with their education savings accounts monies. And under the definition of a qualified private school, it would mean any private school currently that is either accredited or non-accredited. And this amendment would strike that non-accredited private school component, and it would authorize qualified private schools to be accredited by the State Board of Education or by any national or regional accrediting organization. So under this amendment, any private school who wishes to participate and receive students with savings account monies would just have to be accredited by any organization generally.
All right, first, we need a second. Representative Landwehr, are you a second on the amendment? Okay. Discussion, we'll do Representative Landwehr and then Representative Hoy.
Madam Chair, well, I guess for the representative with on page 2, on this accreditation, that's just like we have in the tax credit program, right? So it's state accredited okay, thank you.
Right.
To verify.
Yeah. It can be a national or regional accreditation or the state school board.
Thank you.
Nick, go ahead.
Yes, Representative Landwehr, it's similar, but under the tax credit scholarship program, that is specific to ones that have been approved by the State Board of Education for
Okay.
teaching certificate purposes. This is a little bit, if those ones that are approved by the state board don't cover everything, this one would probably be a little broader.
All right, thank you.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is an attempt to try to make it so that this isn't just going to any organization that doesn't have to comply with any transparency standards or standards set forth by the Kansas State Board of Education, but really by saying, or by any national or regional accrediting organization, there can be very limited transparency and standards with those organizations. And it sounds like, since it doesn't have the exact same language as the tax credit scholarship, that they may not even have to register with the Kansas Department of Education. So I'll be voting no. I don't think this offers much of a change.
Nick can actually expand on that, but if they're going to receive anything from an SGO, the State Board of Education has to know that they exist, and they have to know that they are qualifying school. So they would be registered in that sense, because they're not going to allow any type of credit to go to them otherwise.
So that's all they have to do is online registration that is...
No, it's not an online registration. They have to be a qualified school. So, and I'll let Nick expand on what that means, qualified school.
So, and maybe my first description of it didn't highlight this. One of the main things that this is doing is striking that provision that it doesn't include any non-accredited private homeschool. So it's striking that homeschool definition, and it's also striking the language that previously under this ESA Act would have allowed any non-accredited private school to participate unless it was a homeschool. So it's striking that non-accredited private school allowance out, and it's making it only apply to those schools who are accredited by the State Board of Education or by any national or regional accrediting organization.
And Nick, if I remember right, this is mirrored after the first introduction of the ESA bill last year, correct?
I'd have to look back. I think it's very similar. I do remember we tried to take homeschools out with an amendment with that language as being stricken there to specifically remove them, but yes, so it's very similar to that.
And to note, many of our homeschool parents and families are happy to be left out of this. Representative Hoy.
Okay, so I do want to clarify though, but so by striking on page 2, lines 28 through 30, there could, some national or regional accrediting organization could be out there to accredit homeschools, and so we are in fact putting that provision back into this bill, or that it could apply in some cases to homeschools?
Nick, if you understood the question, I lost you there for a moment. Feel free to answer. If not, I'll have you rephrase.
So under state law, and if you look on page 8, this would be an amendment that I would request myself as a technical if this amendment does not get on. But if you look on page 8, this probably should have been stricken when we put the qualified private, or the definition that's trying to remove homeschools from the bill. This provision on page 8 should have been stricken. Under state law, a non-accredited private school that generally registers with the State Board of Education is considered a homeschool. So homeschools under state law are non-accredited private schools. And I'm not sure about
Section is that?
homeschool
What
accreditation.
lines are you looking at, so we make sure?
It's on that third page of your amendment at the in that new section 12.
Third page. And so what line numbers would we strike out to make sure we're all on the same page?
It's on that page 8. It'd be starting the strike in lines 33 through 35 down there.
Okay.
And that
Okay, I
fully-
see.
That fully removes homeschools from being considered in the bill as well.
Okay. So the amendment strikes out language that allows for non-accredited, which would be registered home schools, would have fallen into that category. And it adds language that requires the qualifying school to be an accredited by the state board or by a nationally or regionally accrediting organization. Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that explanation was helpful. So to become a qualified private school, then an applicant, let's say they are a state or regional accredited school, they apply with the treasurer in a form or manner that we're going to have the treasurer come up with. So they wouldn't ever have to provide any information to the Board of Education, or would they? That's where I'm confused.
I'll let Nick respond and I can follow up.
So if they are accredited by the State Board of Education, they would be providing and going through that accreditation cycles under the state board's accreditation system. But if they're accredited by a national or regional organization, they probably would not have very much connection to the State Board of Education, but they would be operating under this program and be subject to the audits and that are provided under the program.
I would note that the accreditation through Kansas Department of Education or the State Board of Education, it only requires participation of assessments. It doesn't require improvement of assessments on that. It does require social emotional learning. It does actually assessing social emotional learning, kindergarten readiness, individual plans of study. I think maybe graduation rates would be on there, but the schools through statute have to report on the website. That's a statutory requirement. That is not a state board requirement, except that through what we have provided. So there may be a national organization that does not accredit on social emotional learning or kindergarten readiness. They might accredit on achievement. It might be different. Any other items? You may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
All right, all those in favor of the Hoffman Amendment, which is House Bill 2550 changes, say aye. Aye. And those opposed? No. All right, motion carries. Notice that next we have Representative Tarwater. You're on Base Bill 2615.
I would move that we move House Bill 2553 into 2615.
Is there a second to move House? Okay, there is a second to move House Bill 2553 into House Bill 2615. Any discussion? Second by Hoffman. Representative Tarwater, you do have an amendment for 2553 as well?
I do.
Okay, we'll hold off on that. We'll first.
Madam Chair, would it be okay to let folks know what that is?
Hold on. We have an amendment with a first and a motion and a second. So we can discuss the amendment, but then we have two different amendments. So if you'd like, committee, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with, if there's no discussion on just adding it, then you can look at the amendment that he's placing into it. So motion to add House Bill 2553 into House Bill 2615. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. And any opposed? Motion carries. The House Bill 2553 is now, its contents are now included in House Bill 2615. And Representative Tarwater, for the second amendment, you may make a motion.
Okay, so 2553 is the open enrollment bill that we heard a few days ago. And this amendment makes some changes. I'll let Nick explain kind of what I was doing.
We'll get the explanation, and then we'll get a second, and then we'll discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Tarwater, would you like Nick to go over and you follow, or vice versa?
That's, I can explain it in a little bit, but he knows more about the technical stuff. Basically, thought that sending the information to legislative post-audit might be a little too much for them. And also wanted to give the local homeowners an avenue to weigh in on any decisions that the school board makes as far as when they develop their plan, as far as how many students would be allowed in each class. You know, if there's 10 spots open in second grade, they may be only able to take 2 or 3 based on what the homeowners are talking to them about. And then if, as far as people that they could exclude, they should have the homeowners weigh in on those requirements. I mean, absenteeism and suspensions and expulsions are good reasons, but this also says shall not be limited to. So there could be a whole list of reasons that they wouldn't want to accept a student, and I felt it important for the homeowners to weigh in on that.
All right, so before we take a second on your motion, let's have Nick walk us through it.
Yeah, committee, so as Representative Tarwater said, just a little bit of context. This is on the, as the chair said, the open enrollment bill. One of the main things this is doing is Representative Tarwater said, you can see this on page 2 of the amendment. There is in the larger balloon, it says insert attachment 1. And if you turn to the very back of the amendment, you'll see attachment 1, and this would insert a new section 2. So what this would do is on or before January 1 of 2023, each Board of Education has to adopt a policy to determine the number of non-resident students that the school district has the capacity to accept in each grade level. So this would be the school district's general policy on how they're going to determine their capacity limits. And it has to clearly specify the reasons that may be used by the board to deny an application of a non-resident student seeking to transfer to the district. Those reasons can include the student's record of school absenteeism, suspensions, or expulsions from the school, but could also include but not be limited to those things. In addition, it would have to specify the school district's policy to exclude a student's continued enrollment if they have transferred to that student or to that school district pursuant to the open enrollment bill. So the school district's policies would have to define how they would deny continued enrollment to a student who had transferred to the district. Prior to adopting their general policy, the Board of Education has to call and hold a hearing on that policy, and the board has to provide notice, which has to include the time, date, and place of the public hearing, and that notice has to be published in that district for 2 consecutive weeks, and then also posted on a newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks, and then also posted on the school district's website. At the hearing, the representative from the Board of Education would present the board's proposal for that policy, and the board has to hear some testimony regarding that policy. And following that public hearing, after consideration of the testimony and the evidence that's presented at the hearing, the board shall determine whether to adopt or revise that policy at a subsequent public meeting of the board. So as I said, committee, this would require those policies to be in place on or before January 1 of 2023. The other main thing that you notice throughout the bill is a delayed effective date. So the rest of the provisions would not take effect until July 1 of 2023, so that policy would be in place prior to the open enrollment statutes taking effect. The final thing, as Representative Tarwater mentioned, it removes what was previously in there is that the LPA, the Legislative Division of Post Audit, would randomly select some districts to audit, and it removes that and instead would require the State Department of Education to randomly select one school district and audit that school district to evaluate the district's transfers and the capacity levels to determine if the school district complies with the laws and policies of the district and this bill. And then would report those audits to the legislature once completed. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any, Madam Chair.
All right, we'll take questions for Nick or for Sean before we do that second. It didn't include intra transfers within a district, did it?
No, so the bill limits transfers between school districts. If one student is going to transfer pursuant to open enrollment, they can only do that twice per year. So that's between school districts. But this bill doesn't deal with intra-district transfers between the school buildings of an individual, of one district. That would be up to district policy of how they handle that.
So it does not infringe on local decision-making for inside the district. Representative Estes.
Nick, is there a legal definition for public hearing? Somewhere in statute?
So I think the general, yeah, it's generally known that that's going to be an open public meeting of that local Board of Education. So it'll be noticed, and there's many other statutes that require local boards of education to hold a public meeting and notice that public meeting and take certain actions at it.
Thank you. And I asked that question because I'm going to ask the maker of the motion if they'd be open to a conceptual amendment to their motion.
Let's get a second, and then we'll do that. Is there a second for the amendment as it is, the Tarwater Amendment? Representative Landwehr has a second. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Representative Estes.
So I have a concern that many school districts run their meetings with a public comment time. People are limited. Some districts have rules that you can only speak so many times during a month. So my conceptual amendment adds on to D, at the end of the first sentence, the proposed policy, any parent, legal guardian present or participating virtually must be allowed to speak.
Okay, I'm going to have you repeat that one more time. Exactly the location, and we are on attachment 1.
Yes, section D.
Okay.
And the first sentence ends on the second line, the proposed policy, and insert, any parent, legal guardian present or participating virtually must be allowed to speak during the public hearing.
We're going to consider this a second amendment, not one that's a substitute. So it's just an amendment on the bill. So there's a second by Representative Penn. And let's open up for questions. Representative Byers.
Just for clarification's sake, this would then allow the school district to decide to define what capacity is, whether it's based upon their pupil-teacher ratio or based upon the architectural size of the building. Is that correct?
Representative Tarwater, but your question, I think, is for the base bill, and I think we're on the amendment. So we're on the Estes amendment, but we can come right back to you, Representative Byers, after we get off of this amendment.
Yes, ma'am. I understand that, but in the new section 2, it says each Board of Education or school district shall adopt a policy to determine the number of non-resident students the school district has capacity for.
Okay, then I apologize. Representative Tarwater, did you have a comment?
Yes, so that was that part was in the base bill, but it didn't allow for the local homeowners' participation. And that's why the amendment that just went on, I think that went on. The intent was, we got a lot of complaints or concerns about class size, maybe academic requirements, and these individuals that would be transferring in weren't paying property taxes, but the locals were paying property taxes. And so while I felt it was important for every kid to have a chance and move into a district, or if they can't afford to move into a district and there's space in that district, I think it's important to allow that kid to have a chance. But I also think it's important for the homeowners to be able to weigh in and the school board to set some parameters on that. If they have 10, like I said, if they had 10 spots, and the parents are worried about class size, but 3 or 4 kids extra would be reasonable, we could give those kids a chance, but it would be approved by the local homeowners as well.
Okay, and a follow-up on that, are we excluding tenants, or is it confined to just homeowners, or is it anybody who is a resident of that district?
Well, it's
As children.
anyone public would be able to, anyone there, with this amendment that she's going to put on there, any parent, legal guardian, present, or virtual could participate.
Thank you. And I'd asked my question because when we heard the bill the first time, we didn't have a clear definition of what capacity meant. And so that's just want to make sure we can clear that up as to what we're going to use as a definition of capacity. Thank you.
I think there's one thing relating to this bill is that the local boards have a huge leeway as the bill is currently written to determine that. Representative Estes, we have a question from Representative Hoy, and then I have a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the amendment we're on would be in new section 2, section C.
Section D.
Oh, D, at such, okay. So would the carrier of the amendment consider it a friendly amendment if we make that section also apply to the House K-12 Education Budget Committee?
That's not a matter that I contemplated, but this is a decision that affects parents, and I think parents have a right to participate in a public hearing, and that's the nature of a public hearing. So I'm going to defend my amendment.
And I will comment, being the chair, if someone gets their testimony to our assistant 24 hours in advance and they want to be here, I have not denied them. So if they want to speak on a subject that we're not addressing, then I would deny them, and I would reserve the right to do so. It would be inappropriate to put a House or a legislative item inside a bill that deals with local school boards. But again, I guess you're thinking that I prohibit voices in here. I don't. But local school boards.
And I did not suggest that at all, Madam Chair.
Local school boards actually have prohibited. And in fact, I think Representative Estes shared stories of constituents who said because they posted it on a Friday, they weren't allowed to speak on a Monday. And so I think that's why this concern comes up, and being in a weekend. So
Thank you. Well, I think the answer to my question. I think the answer is
Representative
no,
Hoy.
it's not a friendly amendment, so I won't offer it.
Point of order. I am still the chair, and I really would appreciate you to allow me to call on you. It's just how we do it. I would appreciate it. Thank you. We are back on the amendment. Any other questions, Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with this, I'm sorry, I'm not following along on the amendment page. Would this have anything to do with the time limit for public comment?
Not per speaker. I think it's reasonable to allow that local school board to assess how many people they have, how much time they have, and how much they want to allow each person who would like to testify. But I want to make sure that homeowners and parents and everybody who wants to participate in saying, this is what I want capacity to look like, gets an opportunity to speak and participate.
But it's virtual attendance as well as in-person attendance.
Yes.
So if 100 people sign up online and 100 people are in the boardroom and the board still has to conduct business, you're saying that 200 people now have the right to speak at that public comment section, regardless of how long into the night it runs?
Yes.
And is this going to infringe upon the board's capability of the business that they have at hand if that public comment is to run until midnight and then they still have to do the business of the district? This does not sound like local control to me at all, and I think it puts the responsibilities and the duties of a duly elected board at jeopardy of not being able to conduct business.
Representative Estes.
I would say there is no greater local control than parent participation.
Madam Chair, may I comment?
Yes, you may, Representative.
And I would agree with that, and that's why we have local elected board members where parents get to elect their board members.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I seconded this motion because there had been talk of, as the representative was making the contemplation of people not being heard, being cut off at those particular school board meetings, or being told that their voice did not matter, even though they are the taxpayers, even though those are their children or their their grandchildren or whatnot that are in those schools. And I would agree with the carrier of the amendment that there is no greater duty for that body than to hear from those people that elected them.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were some school districts that actually did. I mean, they'd have 100 or 150 parents, and they stuck through and let the parents speak, which I thought I applauded them for that. We've had an example most recent last year. It actually came out of the Derby School Board. Prior to that, here a few years back, it actually came out of the Wichita 259 School Board of the chair stating that these meetings were public, but not for the public. And you're like, well, now wait a minute. It's the public that elected you. It's the public that pays for the facilities and everything that you're using and the staff that you're using. So parents and others that are taxpayers want to be heard. And they don't feel like they are being heard. Thank you.
All right. My concern with it is, and I agree that we want to hear them, but it could be the time limit. Because I know in our committees, we do put a time limit on it because it would be unfair not to for both the board, for the staff, even for the public. I'm wondering to find a compromise between what you're recommending here and what concerns I might have as a public official is to strike the virtual, and they would have to be present. And does this mean they have to sign up ahead of time, or can they just attend?
I have it in my mind that just attend. I guess I'd be willing to take off virtual and go for those present. The reason I thought about virtual is kind of a harken back to the lessons learned when I spent this summer trapped upstairs in my house with my broken leg and foot. Sometimes, it's an ADA issue that people want to be in places they can't be.
Sure.
So I was trying to be accommodating to.
Let's talk it out here. Representative Tarwater.
Just curious, what if they what if they are closed because of COVID and they don't allow people there? Then how do people testify?
It could be an amendment where if it's virtual, then they have to allow the virtual comment or have a policy up to a certain amount of time. But if it's open, then the unlimited comment has to be in public.
I could live with that.
The only thing I would say about that is that we might, after today, everything has another opportunity to take a look at, that we might, I'd ask you, Representative Estes, to kind of dive into how would that work? What parameters do they have? Do they have to report it ahead of time for this particular language, it only applies in this situation and not all situations. So if you would take it upon yourself to kind of think it through, and we could still have a motion on this with the friendly amendment, if the second's okay with that? Friendly amendment? Okay. So would you like to read it one more time?
Any parent, legal guardian, present must be allowed to speak. And then include the language that you had, which I'll let you restate if you feel necessary.
Well, I'm not going to add that. I was just thinking that in general, that might be something that maybe you could ponder, we could come back to, because this has another opportunity. And so I'm not going to change it further, just wanting you to maybe think about other ways to address the bigger question. Representative Landwehr.
You said legal guardian or parent. So how does that classify for sync kids?
Wouldn't a sync kid have a legal guardian?
It may not be the foster parent. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I understand your concept and where you're headed. I'm just thinking that there's some things that might need to be fleshed out a little bit more on it before, you know, because I like the concept, you know, definitely support that, but I'm just not comfortable with so many questions on, you know, how that would physically work, whether we deal with time limits, who can do it, because I think anyone has an opportunity to speak before a school board. That's not people that have kids in school. We hear that all the time, so.
Representative Estes, and then Nick wants to weigh in.
Representative Landwehr, your point's well taken, and normally I would have flushed this out and developed some detail to it, but if this is on site, yes, so I'm willing to take a deeper look at this and come back to it if that's makes everybody more comfortable. But I do feel a need for this bill, and we can get to that later.
And I know Representative Estes, you have talked to me about the bigger picture and that bigger concern, but we'll take a pause here and ask, Nick wants to respond.
Yeah, my colleague Tamara pointed out in the bill that if you look on page 1 of the amendment or the bill, you'll see a definition of parent and also a definition of person acting as parent. So there are defined terms in there that Representative Estes, we could use in that.
Sure, it says parents, natural, adoptive, step-parents, and foster. Representative Estes.
And I'm happy to do that. I wasn't quite sure if that definition applied to what I was doing or not, since I didn't go get that law degree. Thank you very much.
So right now, we have an amendment that is either friendly amended or pulled, or Nick, the other option is the language that's already in the bill. Can we reference that? Or does she need to have the language? How about this? I'll let you respond first, and then I'll respond. If you could follow any of that, if not.
Well, currently the proposal is any parent or legal guardian. And parent is defined,
Okay.
as I said, in the bill, but there is also a definition of person acting as parent, which may get to Representative Landwehr's kind of concerns. So certainly the amendment could reference or use both of those defined terms.
Representative Estes.
That's what I'd like to do.
Okay, so we do have an amendment with the friendly changes, with the understanding that it may be reviewed again and at a later date. So if there's not, Representative Landwehr.
So are we not passing these bills out today?
We actually are, but what the intent is ultimately, and many of you know this, is that we will likely add our policy with funding. And when you add policy with funding, whether we do that 2 weeks from now or whether we take some of these bills and add them after we pass them out today, that doesn't mean we can't use the language and add them in on Monday to something else too. So that gives actually multiple ways to touch the bill, not even to mention amendments that might occur on the floor. So that's what I was thinking.
So what might be better, Representative, would to withdraw your motion at this time on amendment, and then work with Nick and others to flush that out a little bit more? Because I think you're tightening a little bit more than maybe what you had intended on doing. And so then, as she said, this isn't the last look at it. Monday's not going to be the last look at it. We'll have a lot of other looks to come back on it.
Representative
That's just my
Estes.
suggestion.
It's your call here.
I'd like to move forward, and I'd be willing to adapt as we go forward. Yeah, I'd like to move forward.
Okay. And thank you, Representative Landwehr, good suggestion. So we do have a motion and a second with a few friendly amendments, and Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I'm trying to follow along. So we're now going to add the public comment amendment with the definition of parent on the first page of the bill. Is that
Parent or person acting as parents.
okay? But it's not just a. So what if I'm a grandparent?
It has to fit in the definition that's found on page 1 of the bill. Parent means, and it gives a list, and person acting as a parent means, and it gives a list. So it has to fulfill that. Okay, if the grandparent is acting as a guardian, then that would be, or it's adopted or stepped or foster, or who is liable by law to maintain or care for the support of the child, or has actual care and control of the child, is contributing the major portion of the cost of the support of the child. So there's a list there, or guardian custody of the child. So a grandparent could fall into any of those categories.
Okay, well, I guess that answers that question. And your comment just a minute ago about the procedures we can expect raised a different question. Perhaps it's one for the Speaker of the House, but why do we have a K-12 budget committee and an education committee if we're going to put policy with funding through all of our bills?
Well, and I think that is a Speaker of the House question, but I do know that it has been the practice, and it didn't just start 4 years ago. There were many other times when policy and funding has been paired together. But I think ultimately, I'm just going to give you my opinion as chair. When the Kansas Supreme Court made that determination that we're going to spend approximately 51% of our budget in a certain area, and we decided to follow that requirement or recommendation or whatever you mandate, if you will, then once we decided to do that, then I think then the knowledge that if we're going to provide the money, then we're also going to provide policy that goes with it that helps kids. And so personally, I'd never think that it's a good idea just to give money without policy. It just doesn't even make sense to me. So that's the choice ultimately of the leadership in the House and Senate. And then that is something that I fully support as well.
Just to refresh my memory, can you remind me when that Supreme Court decision came out?
Yes, that was 2018 or 2019.
So well before.
Is that right, Nick? The last one, the last of the opinions. I think there were 6 opinions, and so I think it was 2018. I've been here for 2015. It feels like it started in 2010, and it went on for quite a while. So
we came in together after the 2014 election, but I just
yes, that was
to make the point
2015.
That was well before the beginning of this biennium. Thank you.
Right. I don't think I said anything to the contrary. Tamara or Nick, was it finished in 2018 or 2019?
So the last Gannon decision was Gannon 7, and that was June 14th, 2019.
Okay, 2019. My memory, everything just starts to blur together. So, Representative Hoy, and then Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support this amendment. I feel that with the putting into statute these types of rules for our school boards, that we don't even do the same thing here in this committee for good reason. I think that the process that we use helps us get our business done, and in fact have defended my chairs very recently on one of our colleagues on this board at the Johnson County Library session that we just had a town hall. And I think that, you know, if this amendment could possibly prohibit school boards from having signups and testimony and things like we do, I really don't think that's fair. And I would encourage the body to, or our committee to reject this at this time. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this amendment? All right, all in favor of the Estes Amendment, please say aye. Aye. And opposed?
No.
All right, motion carries. Committee, like I said, there are other opportunities to take a look at this, and I do think I'd want to give it some consideration later as well. So amendment passes. All right, let me collect where we are. We are on House Bill 2615. We have added in House Bill 2550, and it was amended. We've added in House Bill 2553 with 2 amendments. Are there any other discussion items or amendments? Representative Byers.
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to add an amendment to 2550 since it's now included in 2615.
All right, you may proceed.
As Nick is the amendment out for me, and I appreciate this. This amendment does basically 2 different things. One, on the audit procedure of schools that receive the scholarship funds or the ESA funds, it would allow for the state treasurer to then audit every school that receives those, just like we audit all the public schools. And the second thing is including language as to the recipient school's qualifications that basically says they cannot discriminate against a student who applies based upon that student's religion.
And Representative Byers, would you like Nick to further explain, or do you feel that that's concise?
Nick, you can go ahead and further explain that.
Okay. All right, Nick, it's yours. As everybody
parts.
opens your amendment, the Byers.
Yeah, so Representative Byers did a pretty good job of explaining this. So committee, you'll see on that second page of the amendment, or what would be page 8 of the bill, the requirement that a qualified private school shall not have any admissions policy that restricts or otherwise limits a student admission based on a particular religious belief. And then also, as Representative Byers said, currently the law provides that the treasurer shall conduct an audit of one qualified private school selected at random each year. This would require an audit of each participating qualified private school in the program.
Nick, I do have a question on that. Do we know how many qualified, or actually this is a Gabrielle question, how many qualified private schools we currently have? In not ESA, because we don't have ESA, but in the tax credit? Is there another question while she's looking? Representative Penn? There is a second. It's Representative Owsley. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the carrier of the bill, it says that if this language were to pass, it would say in line 3 on page 8, line 43 at the bottom, C, the treasurer shall conduct or contract to conduct an audit of each participating qualified school each year. What is the associated fiscal note for that?
At this time, we do not have an associated fiscal note, but the state treasurer did ask me if I could see if that language could be included, as he is willing to make sure that the audit is thorough and complete for each school that participates in the program.
Thank you for that. So we don't know how much this would cost, but I would imagine that it's going to be quite a hefty sum. And then it says for the balloon, a qualified private school shall not have any admissions policy that restricts or otherwise limits admission of students who express any particular religious beliefs. Is it the contention that there are schools right now that limit particular religious beliefs?
While I may not be aware of any school, what I want to do make sure is that any student who is willing to take part in this is given ample opportunity to be a part of the school that they choose, and that religion not be the reason why they are excluded from participating in whichever school they choose.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. That just confirmed that this is a straw man argument, that you have a solution in search of a problem. I appreciate the carrier of the amendment bringing this forward. Thank you.
All right, Gabrielle's going to answer a couple questions I just mentioned, or one of them for sure.
In regard to the question of school districts currently participating in the tax credit scholarship program, there's 54 school districts.
Or private schools? 54 private schools.
There's 9 registered scholarship granting organizations.
Okay, the 9 registered scholarship granting organizations are the entities that, for example, the charitable organizations that match the schools. So do you mean that there's 54 public schools that allow kids to move out of it? Or do you mean there's 54 private schools that receive tax credit dollars? Because the scholarship granting organization would be like the diocese, the Catholic diocese. And there's a variety of those, and I should remember, but ACE is one that we heard from last year. But which one would it mean? Do you think it's the private school that you're referring to? Well, so if we're going to have every school audited that participates in an ESA, I was asking how many schools, how many private schools actually participate in the tax credit program? Just to give us an idea on cost. And while Gabrielle's taking a look at that, now the educational savings account could be much more expansive because you're taking base state aid, so it would be different than the tax credit. But I would just also remind Representative and the committee that restricting a private school's qualifications, it would be a violation of their First Amendment freedom of religion rights for a private entity. And so I think that would run afoul of the U.S. Constitution. But I will leave that for the body to make that determination on your motion. Yes, Nick.
So the State Department of Education has a spreadsheet on their tax credit scholarships site. And on that spreadsheet, it has participating qualified schools. And it looks like there are roughly 100 participating in individual schools that are accepting students.
As you were talking, I was just kind of hitting my mind that it was over 100. And just also remember that if you have a Jewish school, a Christian school, a Muslim school, that this would prohibit them from exercising their faith with their students in the manner in which they would have selected based on the First Amendment rights. Representative Byers.
Madam Chair, I would argue that the school is not restricted from its faith. It can still practice its faith within the building. But a student who attends that school may not share the same faith. They wouldn't be excluded from attending that school. So if they willingly went to, say, for instance, Anor in Wichita as Muslim school, but they were not a Muslim student, they would go ahead and be a part of that Muslim community while not sharing the same faith. And of course, it would be respectful to not abscond the faith in some way, but at the same time, they would be given that opportunity. If a school were, say, for instance, not to be in compliance with this, we would be putting state money directly into the hands of a religious school on a discriminatory basis. Now, if they wanted to open their doors to make sure that anybody comes in, then that would be something I would truly support and have a problem with. But we need to make sure that that pathway is open as we're going to be applying this savings account for those students to use wherever they need. Now, the school may have other standards, and we're not asking about those standards. We're simply talking about the religious belief the student may have.
Thank you, Representative Byers. Representative Landwehr.
Well, and I can't remember, Madam Chair, because it seemed like when we had this discussion, well, at least since I've been back here from 17 forward, and somewhere along the line, Nick, I think a decision came down that we couldn't do those restrictions because a student can attend, let's use the Catholics in Wichita, a non-Catholic student can attend a Catholic school if they pay tuition, but they also agree to participate in the Catholic doctrine. And the reason that is because in all the subjects somewhere along the line during the day, that doctrine is intertwined within it, so you can't exclude them from it, so it can restrict the practices. But this would have been back, I think, Nick, maybe when Jason was doing some of the reviser stuff, because this isn't the first time we've seen this amendment.
Well, and we've mentioned this case before in here, the Espinoza and Montana case that the Supreme Court had a ruling on. And I think that there are some parallels with what you're saying, that the school does, I think the Supreme Court has repeatedly said that the school does get to choose their students. Now, interestingly, at universities, it gets into a public university, another whole discussion on the lines that you're talking of, whether or not you have a religious organization on school that's approved and whether or not you allow members that are outside the affiliation of whatever it is that you have this club or organization for. And there have been debates and lawsuits filed in even the state of Kansas, I believe at Washburn, related to that, where I'm going to just give you a random example. Let's say somebody of the atheist belief system wanted to join a Protestant or Catholic organization, and then they became a member, and then they became the leader of the group and changed the group entirely. So I do think that there is precedent for this whole discussion, but I think in terms of here and public schools and private schools, the Espinoza case is the best example I can possibly think of. But again, it is up to the will of the committee on how they interpret that, because I can't clearly do it. And you've done a great job, Representative, but I think it's going to be a subjective question at best in this domain.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the answer. I appreciate, the reminder, too, that these schools can pick and choose their students when they are selecting students that come in with state money. Thank you.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the fiscal note for HB 2550, it says for every 1% of the state's 464,000 public school students that would participate, a total of $22,485,440 would be transferred from the state general fund to the students' accounts under the scenario in, well, this says FY22, but I think we changed the date, so it'd probably be the following year after it would go into effect. And so if we're transferring millions of taxpayer dollars into these accounts that go to the qualified private schools, we're estimating there's around 100 potentially, I think it's fair to determine whether or not these schools are compliant with the requirements. I don't believe the bill has a tedious amount of requirements for these schools. So I think in order to protect against, fraud and abuse of the program, that this amendment makes good sense.
And Gabrielle, I'm going to ask you a quick question before Representative Estes goes. Can you go ahead and state for us the current base state aid amount? I think it's just shy of $5,000. And while she's looking well, let's go for next year. I think it'll be 4,970 or something of that nature. But I would also note that the average cost per pupil in a public school is $16,000, with ranges that go in the upper 30s in amounts. Gabrielle, what is that?
For fiscal year 2022, 2023, it's $4,846.
$4,846. Representative Estes.
This may end up actually being a Craig question. I'm kind of thinking about the audit half of this amendment. Do we fully audit every school district every year?
No, we do not. In fact, we used to have a policy where 3 school districts are audited every year by legislative post-audit, and now I think we do maybe 1. I do think that there are fiscal audits that schools do for accounting, but I don't think that includes all areas, but Tamara or Nick can weigh in on that. The legislature does not audit them.
I would probably defer to Craig as well to fully explain their audit process.
Because we are working a bill and Craig is here, I would just ask that maybe afterwards we double check that, or if you wanted to just stand up and tell me if we audit school districts, you're welcome to do that too.
You're correct, Madam Chair. The legislature does not. The school districts have an independent CPA audit every year, and ks.gov audits weightings, enrollment, those types of things every year for every district.
Thank you, and I apologize if I was out of order, Madam Chair.
No. We all like to get the best answers as possible. Yes, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know as we get ready to take a vote, I just wanted to thank you for setting forward the Espinoza case and the constitutionality challenges that you would hear for such an amendment as this. I see it as hostile to religion, both for the members of the Islamic faith in my community, Catholic faith, Christian faith, and the Protestants and everyone. I see this as an amendment that is not only tedious, to use previous commenters' vocabulary, but also burdensome when you start striking down or being hostile to people's faith and the freedom of assembly. So I would not be in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I make a comment?
Representative Nguyen, I will call on you.
Thank you. And in the future, do you want me to, use the raise hand icon or just speak out? I'm not sure how you want to proceed.
Yes, you can use your raise hand icon, and Rachel, our IT expert here, will let me know through Gabrielle. We'll do that.
Okay, thank you. I would support this amendment because it is straightforward. It asks for accountability. The cost of this ESA, we already know it's off the charts. And again, I think that projection has taken place, that this amendment just says, the way I hear it, you can't discriminate based on religion. It doesn't say, you will force someone to pray when they're not supposed to pray. But this is clear, straightforward, not offensive. So I think we need to stop projecting all type of scare tactics and look at the merits of the amendment. So thank you, Madam Chair. I support the amendment.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 9, the line 2 there, it says that the audits determine whether the qualified private school is compliant with the requirements of subsection A. Could we have the revisor walk us through what the requirements of the private school are, please?
Yes, so the requirements of a qualified private school is, one, with the amendment that Representative Hoffman proposed and the committee adopted, that qualified private school would have to be accredited, and then also show proof that qualified private school provides instruction in those subjects that are required by statute in 72, 3214, 3217, and 3235, which is, it's the basic subject areas of math, reading, history, and then Kansas history as well. And I could start pulling those up to get those, but those would be the requirements: accreditation, and then teaching those mandatory subject areas.
So it's not an overly burdensome like financial audit. We're just making sure that the qualified private schools are accredited, either state accredited or national or regional, and that they're providing courses that meet the criteria. Is it the ROSE capacities, or is it just?
No, those statutes are not the ROSE capacities. Okay. Those are specific course requirements. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, spelling, English, history of the United States, civil government, duties of citizenship, health and hygiene. There's Kansas history and government as well. And then also civics education, United States history, would also be included in those requirements.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So we're just cross-checking to make sure that they're accredited and providing the proper courses.
Representative Estes.
Wouldn't proof of proper courses be part of the accreditation process?
I actually don't think it's part of the accreditation process specifically, but they would be required to be a school of good standing, so I would think that they would, so I guess yes.
It's kind of duplicate.
It would, even though it's not under their 8-prong items. Craig, again, could probably speak to that, but we know that there are 8 things that are criteria for accreditation for the public schools, but in essence, the public schools have to follow all the statutes on the courses, so I would think that the accreditation would also be dependent on those private schools following those same statutory guidelines. Is that correct? Craig's shaking his head correct. So yes, Representative Estes,
So
it
in a
is.
way, is this kind of, we're duplicating something?
It could be interpreted that way. Representative Hoy, and then Representative Landwehr, did you have, and then Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But those, for accreditation, we don't know what national or regional boards would necessarily require for their accreditation. For the state accreditation process is different. So, I think it's, again, good to make sure that the schools are at the very least meeting those minimal standards that are set forth in this.
Okay, so any other comments or questions? Representative Estes?
I just wanted to make a statement because I have kind of decided how I'm going to vote on this, and we voted on a similar measure in another committee where I made an amendment, or spoke in favor of an amendment that prohibits a student's private answers from religion being used to exclude them, and I think Representative Byers was there, and so I've been sitting here kind of thinking about this, and I think there's a difference between when a student gives private religious explanations of their beliefs to a private company, and we had a care of duty to make sure that that wasn't used to exclude them. And then I think about a group's right to define their own religion, and I'm uncomfortable going that much farther, but I think you bring forth an interesting point to think about, but I don't think I'm going to vote for your amendment, but I appreciate you raising the issue.
All right, Committee, Representative Johnson for the last question, and then we'll turn it back to Representative Byers.
Yeah, I just want to comment, qualified private schools shall not have any admissions that restricts or otherwise limits the admission of students. Suffer the children to come unto me. My two daughters went to Catholic schools despite the fact that I was not Catholic, and I agreed to participate within their scope and their training. And they were not excluded because they were not members. Yet, if you are willing, so I'm not sure, it's a very unique concept, I guess. So many churches need to welcome people in and share. And sometimes I worry that we exclude people that then never get that opportunity to hear the words of faith. Thank you.
And then the only difference would be is those churches or that religious school would have that opportunity to welcome in others by choice. It wouldn't be the state dictating that they do that because they were privately affiliated. If there are no other questions on the Byers amendment, we'll go ahead and allow Representative Byers to close.
Close my amendment.
All those in favor of the Byers amendment, say aye. Aye. And opposed? No. Motion fails. Representative Johnson. Okay, Representative Johnson, would you like that recorded? Representative Johnson abstains, and it is recorded. Abstain. Okay. All right, committee, are there any other amendments for base? Yes, Representative Tarwater.
Sorry, I just had a question for the revisers or researchers. How many students are currently enrolled in our current program? About the tax credit, how many?
As of the end of this past school year, there were 1,614 eligible students for the tax credit scholarship program.
Okay, Madam Chair, there's been a lot of discussion on how much this is costing Kansas. But we only transfer the base state aid in the ESA program. And we actually transfer less than that in our current program. We get a tax credit of 75%. The average scholarship is only $4,000. And so we're giving up $3,000 in SGF. And so we are actually saving $5,000 a kid times 1,600. We're at $7 million, $8 million or a year that we're saving on these children in tax dollars. So it's not costing us, although we are transferring a lot of money, we're actually saving money. This program, we would save less, but the same number of students were into this, we would be at $3,721,000 savings of SGF money, even though we're transferring money, because the average weighting is 1.48. Because we're only talking about kids that qualify for at risk. 1.48 is the weighting for at risk, and these kids qualify for many more weightings than just that. So I'm using the minimum amount possible, and the state aid is, the SGF is saving quite a bit of money on this program, and the kids are coming out better off.
Sure, and just to reiterate, this is for at-risk kids. There are 11 qualifiers, and many of these kids, probably the majority of these kids, fall in the free or reduced lunch. So the proxy is the free lunch, and ultimately, if this were a successful program, it would actually, yes, it would be a savings because the child would be receiving an education for probably a third of what they currently are. All right, all those moving on. That was just a comment, sorry. We are back on the House Bill base bill of House Bill 2615. We have amended in 2050, we've amended in 2050, 2553, plus related amendments. Are there any other amendments for House Bill 2615? If there are not, then I will turn it back to the originator of the motion, Adam Thomas, to make a closure. Yes. Representative Owsley.
I don't have an amendment, but can we continue discussion for just a second?
Sure. Representative Owsley.
Okay, so as we were discussing that last amendment, I had time to click through some emails. And I have in my inbox over 200 emails opposing 2550. I've got over 50 opposing 2553 before we stripped out the local control on the public comment from the local school boards. I will not be supporting this, and I wonder if the will of the committee actually reflects the will of our constituents, as the only proponents that I've seen for either one of these bills was sitting right here in front of the committee. And I don't recall if any of them were individuals or if they all represented a corporation or organization. So I will be a no on.
And I respect that decision to represent your constituency. I will say that that is not reflective of either Kansas or the United States. There are national polls that say as much as high as 73% or more, including Republicans and Democrats, actually are proponents of choice. And it is growing across our nation with more and more students opting out of public school, whether it's for homeschool, which is on the rise, or whether it's private school. Choice is a very, very highly polled item. Representative Byers.
And Madam Chair, I would say that the poll that you just quoted was a survey of people with the question asked, if your school is failing, would you be interested in doing this in place of it? The poll did not ask if you are satisfied with your public school as it is. So while its statistic is valid based upon the polling question, the question's incomplete as to whether we actually have an understanding of how the people of Kansas feel. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And there are lots of variety of polls, and I think we're all wise to look at how the question is asked, because I will agree with you. You can ask a question in certain ways and get it a certain answer. So absolutely agree with that. But actually, I'm referencing some broader polling, and the broader polling doesn't have the suggestive language, but I'm sure many of them do have suggestive language. So I do appreciate that each of us are representing our constituency, and that's what we're called to do, as well as follow our own conscience. So with that, Any other items for the will and the good of this House Bill 2615 that we would need to pass it out as a House substitute, Representative Thomas, because it is pretty weighty. And so in order to clear it up, if you could make a motion to pass it out favorably.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the debate. I appreciate all we've done today. And with that, I move that we pass out House substitute for House Bill 2615 favorably.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there a second? Representative Hoffman has seconded the motion to pass it out, and that's the close. I don't think I needed to get a second on that, did I? No, I did not. So that was the closure. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion carries. Representative Owsley, did you want your vote recorded?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like my no vote recorded.
And two others, Representative Hoy and Representative Byers, recorded. All right.
Representative Nguyen.
Representative Nguyen, we cannot record, we can't account it as
That's
a.
correct. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Yeah. Okay, committee, let's go ahead and take these items and set them aside. We're going to go to our last set of bills to consider today. Just trying to grab my bills. Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to, at this time, is that we move to make House Bill 2662 pass it out favorably.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for House Bill 2662. Do we have a second? Representative Johnson for the second. Now we'll open it up for discussion. Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, I want to point your attention to page 6, very bottom of the page, number 1. This is the affirmative defense for teachers. If a school purchases the material and provides them to the teacher, this is a clause in our criminal code that protects the teacher from being prosecuted. And the changes that were made to that section could, the way I read it, could indeed accidentally cause a teacher to be arrested for something a school did. And I don't think that was the intent of the committee when this bill was written. And so I would suggest that we strike section 4 to avoid a possible, there's no way that was the intent of this committee. And we need to fix that, in my opinion.
All right, Representative, there's a motion on the floor, amendment on the floor, seconded by Representative Thomas. Some heads are shaking in affirmation. We'll open it up for questions. It is a conceptual amendment, and it's pretty easy because you're just striking an entire section. Questions for Representative Tarwater? No questions? Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Representative, what you're trying to do is so we don't have, criminal charges on some of the things that we've seen utilized in our schools? Is that what you're looking at?
Well, the changes that we made would make a teacher liable for something the school did. The affirmative defense here is that the school bought a book and the teacher had it, and that she wouldn't be able to be prosecuted for that. We've changed that, and this is not the teacher buying the book. This is a university or a school buying a book and providing the materials to the teacher. She shouldn't be liable for that, and I don't think that was the intent of this.
So what you're addressing is one of the examples that we've seen during the special committee, and I don't remember whether it was discussed in here or not, was not all boys are blue, not all boys are blue. material that was,
I'm not referencing any particular.
no, I'm an example. It's an example.
Well, if the school bought a
We'll
book and that
purchased a
book was
that was
expensive,
deemed inappropriate.
right, if the
Okay.
school provided that book, the teacher shouldn't be liable for it.
Okay, thank you. So we're protecting the teachers.
Yes.
Any other comments on this item? All right, all those in favor of the tar water amendment that would strike section 4, say aye. Aye. And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Section 4 is struck. Committee, I have a pretty weighty amendment, balloon amendment, and Nick's going to pass that out. Representative Nguyen, while we're passing out the amendment, I'll let you ask a question, but we are an amendment.
I'll go next, please. Thank you.
Sure, we'll put you next in the lineup. Committee, before I make a motion for the amendment, I'll give you an opportunity to look at it, and then we'll ask for a second. And I think it would be best if Nick walks us through it step by step. So once everybody has one in hand, we'll proceed.
Hey, committee, I'll walk you through, on page 1, you can see that change there. I'm not going to highlight each small change, as you can see those and the language that it's changing. A major piece about this is that the section regarding policies that the board must adopt with regard to parents being involved in a child's education would need to be adopted on or before January 1st of 2023. So these would not go directly into effect and have the school district need policies right away on July 1 when the bill would take effect. But instead, the Board of Education would have to adopt policies to guarantee a parent's right to be involved in a child's education on or before that January 1st, 2023 date. There's some other changes there, such as these policies would be required to have parents be informed of, and it makes a change through either the parent transparency portal or through other means of notification, and have the ability to inspect the materials, activities, and curriculum. So the policies would provide for that. And these would be materials that would be anticipated to be used for instruction. So policies have to provide for parent notification or through that transparency portal. A couple of the kind of clarifying changes on page 2, at the bottom of page 2. The bill authorized a policy or required a policy to allow a parent to object to any learning material, and the balloon states that the policy must allow an opportunity for a parent to object to a learning material, any learning material, and then withdraw such child from the activity or class or program in which the material is used. Similarly, with respect to designation of books and the school's policy for designation of books, parents would have to have an opportunity to request that a school designate a book. And then you see in that larger balloon that that such policies and procedures shall require consideration of that that challenge, and if the challenge is upheld, or that request is upheld, the book, magazine, or other material shall be designated in accordance with the provisions of Section 2, which provides how a book or library material is to be designated as a parental review is recommended. Same thing with the challenge of the material or educational benefit of any book. This would specify that a parent has to have an opportunity to be able to challenge that educational benefit of any book, magazine, or material in the school library, and then the policies have to require consideration of that challenge. And if a challenge is upheld by the board, that book, magazine, or other material should be removed. Likewise, with regard to the parent transparency portals, the establishment of the transparency portals would be required on or before July 1 of 2023. So this would delay the implementation of the parent transparency portals by 1 year, give school districts time to establish those. At the bottom of that page 3 amendment, you see a striking, and then in the larger balloon, this is separating out the academic materials and activities and curriculum, and then on the transparency portals, and then that larger balloon, this would have a separate section for the social and emotional learning materials, activities, and curriculum. And then also in that social and emotional learning materials and activities and curriculum would have to be included those items, those tests, questionnaires, surveys, and examinations that we've had a bill about and heard about within that kind of social and emotional area of the transparency portal. There's some clarifying language on page 4 of the balloon to state that the library catalogs or the link to the library catalogs must clearly provide whether the material is an item that is designated for parental review as recommended, or a change here has been placed on a books under review list. This books under review list would occur upon a request by a parent to have an item designated pursuant to that policy we just discussed. And then at the bottom, you see that the parent could request to designate an item in which parental review is recommended pursuant to those policies, and then any item that's requested to be designated as an item by that parental request would be placed on a list titled the books under review while the request is being considered by the local board of education or by the local school. And this books under review list would be included on the parent transparency portal as well. There is striking of a language that at the bottom of page 4 and then at the top of page 5. This is the language that, as we discussed during the hearing, that would require a Board of Education to go back essentially 5 years and look at all the materials in the library that have been purchased since July 1 of 2017. This balloon would strike that provision, and so schools would only be required to designate those items that are purchased on and after July 1 of 2022 by the school, or that are known items known items that need a designation. On page 5 of the balloon, there's some clarifying language in that top paragraph 3 that the school would be establishing a process to designate any items, to clarify that the school does not necessarily have to designate the item. It would be through that process. And then that large balloon that you see kind of clarifies and provides some a little different guidance with regard to posting of materials on the parent transparency portal. So what this would do is that schools would be required to post materials prior to the first day of school if that school district knows that those materials, activities, curriculum, or information will be used during that upcoming school year. And then for any learning materials, activities, curriculum, or other materials that are not known by that school district at the time that are going to be used during that school year, that a school district shall cause those materials, activities, curriculum, or information to be listed or provided on an ongoing weekly and monthly basis during the school year as those materials are made available to students. For the purpose of making these kind of weekly or monthly updates, there's a provision at the end of that balloon that would allow a school district to use collaborative online document or spreadsheet software to allow multiple users, such as teachers, to update or make additions to content on an ongoing basis, as long as the contents of that online document or spreadsheet is then made available on the parent transparency portal. There's some clarifying information there. As I said during the hearing, the final postings would be due by June 30th of the school year, so at the very end of the school year. And you see some clarifying language there that the portal shall be finalized by the end of the school year. Then in new section 3 with the definitions, some changes here. There's a change in activities, the definition of activities. So these are assemblies, guest lectures, presentations, or other educational events. And the balloon would say that the participation of the student body, a majority of it is required to participate at those activities. So you would have to post those types of events if a majority of the students in a given grade level or a majority of the students in the whole student body or the school are participating in those activities. It also, under activities, excludes teacher lesson plans, and it also does that, again, as you'll see when you flip over, under learning materials as well. So individual teacher lesson plans are not going to be included or a requirement under activities or learning materials and are required to be posted on the transparency portal. In learning materials, I will say there's an addition, so course calendars, so course syllabi, course calendars, and teacher manuals would be included under learning materials. And then as on that, you flip over onto page 6 of the balloon, and this is where it excludes certain items from materials. It would not include academic assessments or tests, those individual teacher lesson plans, or plans or materials that are specific to an individual student, such as an individualized education plan, an IEP, an individual plan of study, or a 504 plan. And Madam Chair, I believe that ends the amendment, and I'd be happy to clarify anything or answer any questions.
All right. Nick, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a motion for the amendment. We'll take a second, and I'll provide some intent for the amendment and then open up for discussion, whether it be questions for the revisor, whether it be anything related to this amendment. So committee, I would ask that House Bill 2662 be amended with this balloon amendment number 1. Is there a second? There is a second from Representative Penn. And for discussion, I'll just open it by intent so we can walk through this together. If you were to look on page 1 and page 2, we definitely want our schools to have the full opportunity to prepare and make sure that they have the right framework to put in place the parental transparency portal. And so that's why the delay of 1 year. We also wanted to be more clear on some of the items that were in the bill that were misunderstood. For example, there was a question relating to having all of your instructional material 1 year in advance because of a date that said June 30th. And that was on page 5. And we just want to clarify that by putting the word finalized by June 30th. So the idea is with the amendment that you would see on page 5, in the balloon, the largest one, if a district knows what materials they have, they need to have them prior to the school year starting on that portal. No, the whole thing is delayed 1 year, so that gives them plenty of time. So it's really the administration or the curriculum superintendent or someone often in the administration building that's going to put the curriculum, the books, anything that's related to links to standards, those would be provided ahead of time because the school would already know that. Any activities that weren't known are clearly indicated that they can be added as they go. By June 30th, everything should be updated and it would be maintained for 2 years. Also, to clarify, teacher lesson plans were not included in the original bill, 2662, but we wanted to make sure that everyone understood that, so it was put in explicitly. In addition, on the testing, the reason there is a separation between the SEL surveys and tests from the academic is because there was some confusion. Not everybody's going to reference the KSA 72-6316. So I understand when I receive lots of emails that teachers said, we don't want to put our tests online. Well, that was not what the bill actually said, so we just separated those two out. So the only surveys and tests would be those non-academic. And finally, I think that sums it up. So with that, we have a motion and a second, and I'll just stand for questions. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you taking doing the hard work of addressing so many of the concerns that, we received emails on. Not all were my constituents, but we are responsive to the plethora of emails that we did receive. I do have a friendly technical amendment, if I may. The first balloon that you have on page 1, I believe that's line 23, says retain a primary. I'd like to change that, if we may, to retain the primary. Thank you.
Representative Penn, you were the one that seconded the motion, correct?
I did.
Okay, so is that okay with you?
It's absolutely okay with me.
Okay, so it is a friendly amendment for the carry of the amendment and of the second of the amendment. So we will accept that.
And if I may, Madam Chair, if there's any other spot that something similar shows up in that regard.
Then that would be a technical cleanup, and Nick has full approval for us to do that. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Penn, can you describe to me the linguistic reason for modifying the word "a" to the letter or to the word "the" and its background?
Yes, thank you, Representative. Madam Chair, the reason that I propose that is because as a parent, I take special care and attention in the upbringing of my children. So I would like to be the primary and retain the primary influence over them, not a. It's not something that I'm willing to share.
You're relating that as a singular term, is that correct?
The a or the
The.
definitive article, yes, sir.
Thank you, very good.
And we do strive for clarity, and so thank you. Representative Byers.
Bouncing off what the previous representative asked, in the case of divorced parents who retain joint custody, and we're saying the parent, the primary care, is that going to cause confusion as opposed to saying a primary, which would imply that both parents have that right?
I'll let Nick respond to that. I do think ultimately that's settled in the court, and so if it's joint custody, then they would both have equal right for that. But Nick, would you like to chime in?
The thing I would point you to is the definition of parent, and you can see it on the balloon amendment on page 6, and also, or on the bill on page 6. It means a parent means a parent, guardian, custodian, or other person who has authority to act on behalf of a child.
So the parent is referred to singularly, but it could be a plural in that sense. It's any, so, okay. Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify. So the requirements of what needs to be in the parent transparency portal haven't changed. We're just clarifying that they have throughout the year to upload all of these things and not before the school year starts.
Well, it wouldn't be exactly the same because initially I received a lot of teachers that thought they needed to put their lesson plans on the portal. They do not. A lesson plan would be, I'm going to do it in this order. I'm going to spend this amount of time and it's more structured. Most teachers do provide lesson plans to their administrators. Some school districts require them to be uploaded. We're not requiring that. What we are saying is that if there's an activity in their lesson plan that day, they would need to reference that activity. If there is an assignment that requires them to do research on 2 core website locations, whether it was NASA or whether it was the Weather Channel, then they would need to reference that. So it's a list. And to be honest, if you're a science teacher, you might have a list of 15 websites that you use over a period of a month. Whereas a lesson plan would say, I'm going to use this website on this day. I'm going to use this website on another day. No such requirement. It's just a list of activities, a list of books, a list of resources. And I think that's the main thing that this bill wants to accomplish, is that's transparency for the parent, that they know what materials their child has access to.
But it still includes all the professional development materials.
It absolutely includes all professional development materials. Now, that doesn't mean that they're uploading those. The bill actually asks that there be a list of those items, and if applicable, the author and the website, that type of information. So it's not asking you to upload everything. They just have to have the ability to go and review those items, and there needs to be a policy of how a parent might review those items.
Right. I think I'm going to support this. I still think it is a lot of extra work for teachers. I mean, I know a teacher at our school is doing some supplemental literacy programming. It's a 2-year training program, and I just can't imagine that parents have the time to go through and read a 2 years worth of professional development materials. But I think I'll go ahead and support this amendment. Thank you.
Are you referencing that the 2 years, it has to be maintained on the website? Is that what you're referencing?
No, the professional development program is a 2-year training program.
Gotcha.
That's 2 years worth of materials that parents would have to have some sort of access to.
Right, absolutely. So, but again, they wouldn't have to upload it on the website. There might be copyright restrictions, but the parent, if they wanted to, some do. We've heard of parents in Arizona that went in and reviewed for hours. I think 8 hours is what someone provided testimony on. We just want to give them that opportunity to do so. Representative Wynn, do you have a question relating to the amendment?
Yes, please. So are you just changing that section, and the other sections other than the tar water amendment are the same?
Well, section 4 is completely gone. And so
Right.
you could just strike that out. So then the changes that I'm proposing are really just simplifying, clarifying, and putting it out for an additional year.
Would you say primarily section 1?
Yes, and do you have the amendment, the balloon amendment? Because Nick's going to email it to you right now. Because that may be the confusion for
Obviously,
you.
no, but thank you.
You what?
I said, obviously, no, I did not have it, if he's going to email it to me now. But
Well,
again, just from what you've said, essentially the clarification deals with section 1 primarily, and then omitting section 4, correct?
Well, my
And of course, the tar
amendment
water
doesn't deal with section 4 because it has already been struck. But
Correct.
yes, you got it. And it is difficult to follow all the things that have been changed without the amendment right in front of you. So,
That's okay. We're clear. Thank you.
okay. Other questions, committee members, about the amendment? All right, if there are no other questions on the 2662 and proposed balloon amendment, then I will close on my amendment. All those in favor, show by the sign aye. Aye. And nay. All right, the motion carries. The 2662 is amended 2 times and open for more discussion on House Bill 2662. Representative Estes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to discuss page 2, lines 4, 5, 6, and 7. some schools do a fabulous job of getting their agendas out, giving parents plenty of time to read through what the agenda is on so they can determine whether or not they want to sign up for public comment, and their public comment process is very open. Unfortunately, that's not true for every school district, and some you don't get the agenda until Friday, and there's a Monday night meeting, and you're trying to catch your local school board person over the weekend, and you've probably missed the deadline to sign up for public comment, because often those are earlier. And there's, between those two examples of the gold standard to the undesirable standard, there's many variations in between. And I'm not going to bring an amendment at this time, but I just want to say I'm glad that I see this here, but I think that we might need to look forward in the future to defining this, if we'd like to see how local school districts handle it first.
Okay, thank you, Representative Estev. We have two questions. We have Representative Nguyen and then Representative Owsley. Oh, that's okay, thank you. Representative Nguyen.
I have an amendment.
Any question? Okay, yes, you could, it's in order.
Good,
Go
thank
ahead.
you. Nick has it.
Representative, would you like Nick to explain, or would you like to go first?
Nick can explain, then I'll follow up. Thank you.
Perfect.
So committee, what this amendment would do is it would propose a substitute bill for House Bill number 2662, which would insert the contents of House Bill 2671, which is currently sitting in this committee. House Bill 2671 and the contents of this substitute bill would reinstate teacher due process for K-12 public school teachers.
And Representative Nguyen, would you like to explain your amendment?
Sure. Reflected just by what your last amendment did, there's still a lot of flaws in the current language. And I believe that, as some of you have said, you concern yourselves with emails that we get from all over the state. This reinstatement would actually restore some respect toward the teachers as well as toward the legislature. So it's pretty self-explanatory. I do believe there are problems with the current bill that we showed yesterday. There is no real reference to the Civil Rights Act. There is potential kind of fear-mongering. People come in and, putting in the minds of parents, and no one denies the fact that parents as the first teachers are very important. But I think as you've shown currently, the language needs to be worked on. So that's why I proposed the amendment. Thank you.
We have a motion and we have a second. Representative Owsley. And now we're on discussion. Questions for Representative Nguyen? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't have a question for the carrier of the amendment. I appreciate her bringing it forward, and I appreciate the work of Representative Stogsdill for introducing it. we've talked about, appreciation of teachers a lot in this committee over the years. We've talked about giving them bonuses when we could for their work through the pandemic. We've talked about merit pay for teachers, for achievement improvements. And I think that this amendment is a way to truly demonstrate our appreciation for the teachers and what they've gone through every day for our kids in the classroom. And then I would also note that of the 70 plus or 70, almost 70 opponents that turned in testimony yesterday, that were able to get it in on time and not have it too full to be able to have their testimony submitted. I went through and I counted 30 plus of those conferees that identified their occupation as an educator, either past or current administrator or classroom. So I know they're watching, I know they're paying attention to us, and I think that this is a way to tell them that we appreciate them. Thank you.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for the bringer of this amendment. I've supported this in the past, and then it was brought to my attention that my school district already has due process. I think the carry of the amendment, does your contracts have due process in it?
There is a generic due process, but there is a problem because without a conformity, you have districts recruiting other teachers away. And so I've heard in this committee about pirating students. Well, there's pirating teachers as well. And one way it's done by some of your schools in your county, just because maybe there's one or two different words. So that's the honest answer for you. And I'm sure you can verify it because we both know, we know people that work in both districts.
Right, so you do have due process. It may not be as good as the due process in our schools, but you do have the right to change that, right?
You have a teacher can go before the law, yes. Not similar to this.
In
Anyone
some
can go
schools,
before the
some
court.
school districts might pay their teachers better than your school district and not have due process, but that would be the choice of the teacher and the choice of the school board to negotiate that. Is that right? Currently.
This has nothing to do with payroll.
So they have the right to negotiate with a teacher, right?
I believe we know that is correct.
Okay, so this would handcuff those districts. What if a district wanted to pay their teachers more, and this now says this changes the current contract with their teachers, and this is a local control issue. If a teacher wants the due process, they could come to Blue Valley out there. Blue Valley offers a good due process, evidently better than yours. You just said it. So I don't think I could support this. Thank you.
A question, Representative Johnson.
This, excuse me, thank you, Madam Chair, might be for Nick. One of the issues that comes up is the capers. Teachers that would take their capers retirement, such as I did, based on my years, it was in my best financial interest. I lost all due process in my district, and I basically served at the pleasure of the superintendent, and that was by law. Does this modify that?
This, I don't believe that would modify any of those requirements. This would simply reinstate the teacher due process as it existed back prior to the repeal of that due process for K through 12 teachers.
Thank you on that. One further question. One of the things I had asked the predecessor that I replaced, I understood why they made changes with people retiring and then so-called double dipping. But the fact is, if we want to retire, I wanted to stay at Wyandotte High School. I absolutely loved that school. But for me not to take my benefits was financially just not wise. And I think sometimes we look at that and we're moving people out for financial reasons. if we can do something, I know this is off the subject, but we need to support some of these inner city districts by not taking these good teachers away. Thank you.
Well, with those comments, I would like a clarification. So what happened to Representative Johnson when he was a teacher and he did not have due process when he retired and came back? Is that what you're saying? Then was that something that was a statutory requirement connected to CAPERS, or was that a local decision of the local school board? Because right now, due process is open to every school district. Probably we could ask Craig how many actually, or actually Kansas Association of School Boards would probably have the quick answer on that. How many school districts do provide due process? And I'll get to you, Representative Byers. I see your hand. You're next in line. Because I do believe that when you can negotiate contracts, there are a certain number of things you can, certain number of items you can you negotiate. And I would imagine due process would be one of them if a school district did not have it. So I'm just trying to understand in your situation, if there was anything that prohibited in law, statute that required that, or if that was just a local school board decision.
It is my total, and I've seen the contracts, and I had to negotiate independently with the superintendent.
So is a local decision?
No, it is statutory that I have no, and my contract, which was given to me, which I still have a couple of them, were very specific in stating I did not have due process in that. Now, I made the choice to stay, and I feel I negotiated a contract, but they could have asked me just to leave on at any.
Sure, and we're going to let Nick comment on that. And once we get into the world of CAPERS, I defer to Representative Johnson because there may be even some federal reasons that doesn't line up. So, Nick.
So under those due process statutes, which currently under law apply to community colleges, technical colleges in Washburn, I believe Institute of Technology, there is a requirement to receive that due process procedures for a teacher who has completed essentially 3 consecutive years of employment. And then been offered another contract. So there's that consecutive employment that would be required. So Representative Johnson, I would guess upon retirement, and then probably a CAPERS required waiting period until you can begin employment again. That would essentially have terminated those consecutive years of employment. And I would guess that the due process procedures would not apply until maybe you get another 3 consecutive years of employment after that retirement.
Okay, and we'll kind of end that discussion on the CAPERS, but that is interesting. I didn't realize that. Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, would this proposed substitute as due process basically just be a baseline due process, and then districts would still be allowed under their local options to improve upon or make it better for their teachers that they wanted to offer a more thorough due process?
So this would set the statutory procedures for due process, and it would be a requirement for every district and to implement for those teachers who hit those consecutive years of employment and qualify for the procedures afforded under the statutes. I would assume school districts could add to the due process procedures, but I'm not certain whether districts did that or whether they just stuck to the statutory language.
Thank you. And if I can make one statement on this, a recent poll that came out showed that of Kansas teachers, 40% right now are looking to get out of the job. Another 20% would get out if they could financially make it happen. So while we are talking about trying to find ways to validate our teachers and remind them that they are valued and professional employees, we're looking at a crisis coming at us in education, one that will spill over not just through public education, but through private education as well. As we're seeing fewer and fewer people going into education as college students. And so we've got a negative balance as teachers retire or leave the profession for replacements. And so I think that this would be at least a small step, but it would be a step to put that value back on teachers in Kansas.
Thanks, Representative Byers. And I'd add a couple thoughts on that, and then Representative Thomas. I did actually pull the data, and we're flat on the number of incoming students that enroll for teacher education programs across the regions, but we are actually up a decent amount for those that get their certificate. It may be that more are choosing to retire. They may be in situations such as Representative Johnson. And certainly the pandemic, depending on which side you lie on, you might hate wearing a mask every day, and that may be really restrictive to you. You may hate having to follow quarantine procedures when you have no symptoms. On the other side of the coin, you might really be scared, and that may be a problem for you, and I know there are people on both sides. But I would comment that, because I read an editorial, I think it was Kansas City Star or somewhere, about the legislature and teachers, and I have never heard on either side of the aisle in any of our committee meetings or on the floor disparaging remarks about teachers. And I frankly, as a former teacher, don't think legislators have that much power to drive people away. You love what you do, you're passionate about what you do. What most impacts teachers are what happens in the building. And there are challenges today that probably didn't exist 20 years ago. And so there's lots of reasons for that, and makes really great discussion. And I have a feeling, Representative Byers, you were one of those outstanding teachers. So I just want to go on the record that I've never heard anyone disparage teachers. It's always about policy and about kids, and making kids our priority. Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna vote against this for the simple fact that when we talk about due process, we talk about districts that have it. It is not the fault of those districts that other districts have a policy that's not nearly as good, and teachers are seeking out better employment, better due process, and better pay elsewhere. It sounds to me like this is a local issue and should be handled locally. Therefore, I cannot support this amendment.
And I would just put out the question, nobody has to provide the answer now, but if Mark Tallman's listening online, he can maybe provide it the next time he's in our committee, or KNEA might be able to provide how many school districts out of 286 already provide due process. Because the state does not mandate it, does not mean that the school districts, of course, cannot provide that. And I think that that's a great thing for them to provide, but again, it is local. Representative Landwehr.
Well, and one of the things is you can't do an apples and apples comparison when it comes to pay, because you have some districts that will supply the health insurance for an employee. You go to another district, their wages are higher, but they don't supply the health insurance. So the benefits are spread wide amongst all of our school districts out there. And I actually represent 2 different school districts, and I can guarantee that those salaries and those benefits are huge differences.
All right, thank you for those comments. Anything else? Representative Nguyen, you may close on your amendment.
I will, sure. Thank you. It's interesting that the conversation gets distorted, because this is not about salary. This is not about local control. This is about restoring baseline policy that was trashed in the dead of the night in the past. So from that time, we lost teachers, and you can document that. But I will close, and thank you for your cooperation.
Committee, you have heard the closure on the amendment that would remove all contents and add the contents that are before you. So all those in favor may say aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. No. And the noes carry, so the motion fails. Yes, recorded votes for Owsley, Byers, and Hoy. All right, committee, we are back on the base bill, and it is House Bill 2062. Are there other amendments? Representative Byers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment. And again, as Nick is bringing this out, since the focus of this bill is that this is the Bill of Rights for the parents, I'd like to add language to this so that this Bill of Rights is inclusive to not just public schools, but also accredited non-public schools.
Representative Byers, would you like our reviser to review this? Or do you feel like that's sufficient?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory that any place in the bill that references public schools or public school governance, whether we're talking school boards, whatever, that we also insert the accredited non-public schools and their various governing boards.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second? Representative Hoy is a second, so we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion. Committee. Representative Lambert.
I guess I'd go back to Nick. I'm not sure that that's something that we can legislate to private schools. Is that correct, Nick?
There are other statutes that do apply to private schools as well. So, such as some of those course requirement statutes, those apply to private schools as well. So, the legislature does have some authority there.
And I'm going to make a comment on this. It's actually a great amendment, a thoughtful amendment, and this is why I would personally oppose the amendment. We pay a lot of money, $5 billion to public schools. In no way, wouldn't even get close of covering any of these items through a base state aid, following a student. We don't fund private schools, we fund kids. Period. And even in doing that for these at-risk kids, it's not enough to cover them. Those private schools will be using grant dollars, their own resources to make the difference, or parents will be doing that. So for that reason, because it's a public institution and we fully fund it to the tune of 16,000 plus, we have that higher level of expectation, but there's another reason too. The other reason is that if you go to a public school and that's your only option, you can't afford anything else, you're going to that public school. You don't have anything else you can do. But for the person that can choose to go somewhere else, whether it's using some dollars that follows that child or whether they're using their own money, they are making that choice. And by doing that, they are saying, is this education good? Is it quality? Is it meeting my expectations or not? Therefore, the transparency for that comes through by their buying power. Just like when you purchase an item, that's the greatest form of democracy. You can use your money for something or not use your money for something, and that's you exercising your freedom to make that purchase. That's the ultimate form of democracy. And that's why I would oppose this, is because the parents have that already. But that's just my personal position on it. Other comments? And you may respond, Representative Byers.
I would add that if you go out and purchase a car, there is responsibility that that car do as it's been advertised. This is simply saying if this is a parent's bill of rights, that if they choose to go to a private school, they have the same obligations to provide this information to those parents. So those parents are not caught off guard if 6 weeks into the school year, that private school is doing something that goes against their wishes. Now, yes, they do have the opportunity to walk and go back into a public school, but they need to be able to have the ability to know that these things are there for them, regardless of the educational institution that they choose their students to go to.
And then also before Representative Landwehr, is that a state accredited or just an accredited?
It is simply an accredited non-public school. And I would assume that we would maybe modify it so that it is state accredited in that process.
Okay. Representative Landwehr?
You know, I guess I could, Madam Chair, I could be supportive of this if we're going to give the average per pupil of the state of Kansas, which I think that we've now hit about 19,000. Is that correct? So if we made it the full amount, that is our average, then I think those schools would then have the staff and the capability to do the kind of stuff that we're asking here. And I'd be fine with that then, if we want to change the amount of the money being transferred.
You weren't making a motion to increase the base date. Okay, just a thought. Any other comments regarding the motion? Representative Tarwater.
Madam Chair, I think that no matter where my sons or daughters go to school, I would want to know what's being taught to them. And I don't think what we're asking from the schools is that much, just to let us know what's being taught. And so I think I can support this amendment just because my kids did go to a private school, and some of the things that came home were questionable. And I would want to know about them. And so I think I can support this.
Great point. Thank you. Any other comments? And Representative Landwehr just showed me that what she's got is that the average per pupil is over 19,000. That was over 16,000. And she pulled it off the website. Department of Education. I know sometimes one document will show one and one with another, but that's a big number.
This was I'm sorry. No, this was the document that was legislated back. I don't know, Craig, was that about 17 or 18? No, I mean 18 or 19 when we did that report to give a breakout that was supposed to be one page and now it's like 4 or 5, but. Okay. But this is a report on the Department of Education that was legislated by the legislature.
Representative Estes, and then I'm going to comment again.
This is an interesting question because part of me says, here's what Representative Tarwater is saying, but another part of me says, in a private setting, a parent negotiates a contract with that school in terms, and I think they can ask all of these things then. So I'm a little conflicted.
Okay, I'm going to weigh in on this again because I think it's an interesting debate and interesting points. So first of all, if right now, without this, with this by itself, the Parents' Bill of Rights, the only thing that our state has is a tax credit for low-income scholarship program that serves about 1,600 students. If you were to take 1,600 students and divide that by the total number of private school students, and I don't know what that number is, it's probably a very small percentage. So what you would end up potentially doing is requiring private schools that are private businesses or nonprofits to comply with a state requirement when they might have 2% of their students participating, which might make them think twice about providing that scholarship for kids that are at risk or low income. In this case, it's low income. It's means tested. It's free and reduced lunch. And I certainly wouldn't want to do that. The bottom line comes, the reason that we're requiring this is because most parents, even in Indiana, where they have school choice, public school choice, they have open borders, they have school choice that they have so much choice, and yet you still have about 90% of your students choosing public schools. And Kansas is a very rural state, and so there are very limited alternatives. And we do not, as Representative Landwehr stated, we do not even come close to providing the funding for that. So in Representative Tarwater's case, he'd want to know, I agree, I would want to know too, but as a private school parent, I have the ability to go lobby for them to do this of their own free will. I don't want the state to do this because I could hear our Chamber of Commerce on the business front say, no, you can't do that, even though that Chamber of Commerce business might receive a historical grant tax credit, or they might receive another type of tax credit. They have to report to receive that tax credit, but they don't have to open up and do all the things that, let's say, a municipality might do or a county might do. So I think this opens up, without equity in terms of money, I'm opposing it, but I would leave it to the independent decision of each member of this committee, but reminding that we're talking about a minute percentage of students that would be impacting this. Other comments? Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question, I guess, would follow up as we're talking about the economic impact of this. Have we inquired to see if the economic impact is different for rural school districts than it is for the urban school districts? For instance, if we're looking at trying to do this on electronic platforms, we understand that because of the extra COVID money that came in, a lot of schools upgraded that. But schools that didn't go virtual, that remained in building, did they take the opportunity to, as well, to upgrade antiquated servers to be able to provide this type of electronic documentation so that their parents can access as well?
Well, it's not a good idea to assume, but I'm going to take a leap here because I don't have access to all that information. Craig might, but I think broadband has been expanded greatly. I think there was, when we were going through the COVID, most kids had some type of access through whether it was something connected to their laptop that would allow them through cable companies and so forth. I think you hardly can survive today, even if you're rural. In fact, rural needs the online services more than anyone. And in fact, many of those kids are taking online service or online courses, like a high-end course where they don't have that instructor. So I don't think it would add any more work to a rural than it would to particularly any school. It's an interesting thought and interesting question. Representative Byers.
And I appreciate that. Just for clarification, when we talk about broadband, that's the delivery mechanism. We're talking about server storage capacity because, for instance, when I retired from North High School, my music library had 5,000 titles in it. And that was just my library. And if you multiply it by 150 teachers and their personal libraries they use in the classroom, as well as the library in the school, we're talking a serious amount of data to go in. And so it's going to make sure that if this goes through, that we have the capacity to deliver what this bill promises.
And I think that's a great question, and we could actually probably even dig into that a little bit further. I don't know how many use streaming cloud services or if they are trying to use a mainframe these days. I'm not sure. But I think we can get some answers on that. Not today, but if anybody out there hears this conversation, you might be able to weigh in. And we can certainly talk to our peers that serve in or are from the rural areas. Okay. If there aren't any other comments on this, it is up to the will of the committee on this. So House Bill 2062 for the Byers Amendment. All
Madam
those.
Chair?
Yes.
I need to
Yes.
close my
Closing.
amendment.
Absolutely.
So I will close on my amendment.
Thank you. Yeah, my apologies. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. And those opposed? No. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor, you can hold up your right hand, left hand. 6 in favor, and those opposed? And I'll go ahead and vote. 6 opposed. That puts us at a tie, and so the motion fails. But it is a good topic, and again, we'll have these opportunities to weigh in on these again in the future. Committee, other amendments for House Bill 2062? Representative Owsley and then Representative Estes for amendment.
Oh, I don't have an amendment. You can get that amendment if you want. I'd just like to discuss before we close.
Okay. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would make a motion that we insert the language from House Bill 2513 into House Bill 2662.
Is there a second? There's a second from Representative Landwehr. And would anyone from the committee like Nick to review what House Bill 2513 is? I think we had a hearing early. Yes, there has been a request.
So committee, House Bill 2513 would revise the requirements for the administration of the tests, questionnaires, surveys, and examinations in schools. So current law in 726316 prohibits administration of any of those tests, questionnaires, or surveys if they contain questions regarding beliefs or practices on issues such as sex, family life, morality, or religion, unless they get prior written notification and it obtains written permission from the parent or guardian for the student to participate. Current law also has a school counselor exception to the provision of tests and surveys relating to counseling services. What the bill would do is it would provide additional requirements relating to the administration of those tests and surveys. It would apply this provision to those tests and surveys if they contain questions about the personal and private attitudes, values, beliefs, or practices of a student or any of the student's family, friends, or peers. And prior to the administration of any of these tests, surveys, or questionnaires, the bill would require the school to provide prior written notification to the parent or guardian no more than 4 months in advance of the administration of that item. And that written parental notification would be required to include certain information, including a copy of the test, questionnaire, survey, or examination, information on how the parent may provide that written consent, the name of the company or entity that's producing or providing that test or survey, an explanation of the purpose and how the data will be used and how the data will be collected and whether it will remain private or reported as aggregate data. An explanation of how the test, questionnaire, survey, or exam benefits student learning, and whether the school will receive or maintain that resulting data and how the school will use that data. The bill would provide that written consent could only be provided by a parent after they've received that notification and had an opportunity to review it. And it would require that a separate notification be required for each one of the questionnaires, surveys, or examinations, and that written consent is obtained upon each individual item. Even if a parent provides that written notification, the student would still be authorized to refuse to take that item if the student refuses and not suffer any adverse consequences for such refusal. The bill would also require each school to post and maintain copies of those surveys or examinations on the website, and would also provide that no test, questionnaire, survey, or exam that's referenced in the bill shall be incorporated or embedded into any academic program, course, or curriculum offered or provided by the school district, and it would prohibit the collection of personally identifiable student information. And then finally, I will note the bill would remove the school counselor exception, so that provision would no longer exist in law. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or clarify anything, Madam Chair.
All right, committee, we have an amendment. Did we have a second on that? Yep, we do. We have a second. And any discussion on House Bill 2513 being inserted in 2662? Representative Hoy.
Madam Chair, I'll be opposing this amendment. I have great concerns that were brought forth from our mental health director about some web-based mental health prevention series that they use, that they provide for school districts and can be, I think, life-saving type assessments. And having to have, I think it's the 4 months, I think having to have that time is of the essence when we're trying to save kids or assess different things. So I just am worried that this applies to potentially even adverse childhood experience and trauma, like the ACEs assessments and things that are more necessary in a timely manner.
Committee, any other? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be opposing this amendment too, but I did bring some lipstick for this. I have an amendment.
We need to pass this amendment out first.
It's an amendment for this amendment.
Oh, okay. Well,
That's
let's
enough.
pass this amendment into the bill, and then you can make an amendment.
Okay.
How about that? So we won't be crazy layering, and I don't want to run afoul. Okay, so all those in favor of this amendment can say aye. And those opposed? Motion carries. And House Bill 2513 is now inserted into House Bill 2062, and the floor is yours, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if you'll recall from the hearing that an amendment was recommended by Walt Chapel down in Wichita to exclude counselors from not being able to have parental permission for giving a survey. And this just simply is Walt Chapel's amendment. And Nick, if I didn't explain that 100%, I'd encourage you to correct me if I'm wrong.
Did you want to explain? Go ahead, sorry.
So yes, this amendment, you'll see on page 2 of the amendment, the stricken language near the top, the bulk stricken language there is the school counselor exception. And what this amendment does is it takes that exact same language and places it into the balloon and would essentially keep that, that provision in the bill.
All right, a second on the amendment. Representative Byers seconds the amendment, and discussion on the amendment. Any questions from the committee? Representative Byers.
I was wondering if the carrier of the amendment would be accepting of a friendly amendment to this, so that where it says prohibit school counselors, we expand that out to any mental health professional working in the school, whether they be a licensed professional counselor, a school social worker, you know, someone along those lines, and the school psychologist.
That sounds appropriate to me.
All right, it sounds like a friendly amendment. So committee, the amendment has been adopted per Representative Byers. Nick, did you get that? Do you need it restated?
I think I got the gist of it, but it would...
Maybe you say it one more time?
So not just limited to school counselors, but also allow for the school psychologist, if the school has a licensed clinical social worker on staff or another mental health professional that works for the school in that capacity.
All right. Looking around for questions. I'm going to make a comment. One of the parents that testified, and I don't know if it was just in the interim or if it was before this committee, actually shared an instance, I believe it was both, in which her child was being counseled without her knowledge and giving surveys without her knowledge. And one parent asked to see the survey, not the answers to the survey, just to see it, and they said no, it was copyright protected. So they couldn't even see that. If there's trauma in a child, and if it's my child, I want to know. I want you to call me immediately, because there's nobody that loves that child more than their mom and their dad. And so for me, the idea is that parents are involved in this process. So this would actually remove it and then give the counselors that ability to give those surveys and tests. And that is some of the concerns we've been hearing. Representative Landwehr.
Okay, so if I understood, Madam Chair, what you just explained, it would allow counseling to occur without parents being notified.
Representative Byers can answer that.
My answer would be that and of course, Representative Owsley is the carrier of the primary amendment, but it would not allow for that to take place as far as, if that were to take place, the parent would have the same rights to due process to go to the administrator and to find out what had happened. Because I believe, if I understand correctly, the parent that did complain about it, it wasn't actually anything but a student counselor who was in the system that failed to do that. So it would be like any other type of person who fails to follow school procedure. What this would be really restrictive towards is if you have a student who is in crisis and someone wants to administer one of the suicide assessments, there's not time to contact a parent or parents at work or something like that, that the crisis needs to be dealt with in the moment. The way this bill is written, those crises are not allowed to have that emergency effect. And so we need to have something that allows for that to be an intervention in the moment if needed.
And I don't know, Nick, if you can answer this or not, and I wish that Craig was here, because we went through some of these things with the Mental Health Initiative Program, and there's a line that if you cross, you have to have parental signatures on things. And we even went as far as trying to figure out how to make things digital versus, done manually, et cetera. So I think I'd be just a little bit leery of this, because they have the ability, if there is emergency situations, to do things, but the suicidal assessment is a whole different ballgame. I think we'd be crossing a line that, like I said, if Craig was here, I think he could answer it. There's probably someone listening here online that could answer it, but I'm not sure she wants to engage at this moment. So that's why I would be opposed to that. Second of all, I can tell you, Madam Chair, that if you talk to some of our colleagues that have been around here a while, the individual, and not the representative, but the individual from which this came from, doesn't hold a lot of credibility with either party.
Other possible scenarios with this, number one, if you have a child in crisis, I doubt they're going to give them a survey. I know I would probably be, if they were crying, you're going to give them a hug, you're going to talk to them, you're going to ask them questions. That's not a survey that's from one of these companies that we've talked about. The next thing you're going to do, and once you stabilize them, is get any assistance that you need and then call that parent. So I think that keeping the parent involved is really critical. Again, as Representative Landwehr said, I don't know what all the different processes are, but I think that's vital. And not doing a survey doesn't stop from interjecting and helping a child. No one would want it to do that. Second thing, the unintended consequence of this, if you have a counselor in the classroom, they could provide the curriculum for the classroom, and then they could also administer the survey, and under this that they would qualify since they are a counselor. And we know right now that curriculums, like there are social workers that have substituted as counselors. I think in one district alone, there's some 30-some different social workers that have actually taken the place of counselors. Counselors are former teachers that are licensed by KSDE. Social workers are not. Or if you put a psychiatrist or a psychologist in a classroom setting and have them teach on a particular issue, they're not charged. Their parents didn't send their kids to public school for them to be psychoanalyzed or to have them be assessed or get any type of therapy. So I think this would be contradictory to the purpose of the bill. Representative Estes.
I would just have to say, as a parent, I would be furious if my child was counseled without my permission, regardless of the circumstances. If my child is in crisis and they're worried about suicide, I expect the school to make sure that my child is accompanied by an adult who will make sure that nothing will happen, and to contact me immediately and allow me as the primary lover and giver of care for my child to deal with it.
All right, any other questions on the amendment? Carry of the amendment may close.
I close my friendly amendment.
And Representative Ousley.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
and I could make comments. I fear like we could potentially be interruptive of the counselors, psychologists, social workers, mental health directors. And I do believe the testimony that was talking about the copyright protected came out of our curriculum discussion. I don't think that was a discussion upon this bill. I don't recall it as a discussion on this bill, but I'll move my amendment.
All right, committee, all those in favor, say aye. And those opposed, nay. The noes have it. The motion for the amendment fails. We are back on the bill. We're actually on base bill 2662. It does have the contents of 2513. Any other amendments? Any other discussion? Representative Landwehr, it looks like we made some significant changes, so it looks like we're going to probably need a House substitute for 2662. If you would like to close or pass out favorably.
I'd close on House substitute House Bill 2662 as amended favorably for passage.
All right, you have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. And the motion carries. All right, committee, yes, I will let you have a few comments, Representative Owsley. I'm just going to tie it up real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. No votes recorded. Yes, thank you. We have Owsley, Representative Byers, and Representative Hoy. Okay, committee, you have done amazing work today. We have actually completed 3 sets of bills. 2 are House substitute bills. Those will go below the line. We will not need to meet tomorrow. That's a great thing. We will be meeting Monday. We will be working another bill that is left. I think it's House Bill 2690, but we can double check on that. And ultimately, policy is going to be paired at this time anyway with funding. So we'll at some point see all this back together. So with that, you